In a world saturated with fleeting headlines and manufactured narratives, one channel dares to delve deeper. Welcome to Heartfelt Tales, where we dissect the raw nerve of human experience, exposing the fault lines of power, morality, and the choices that define us. Tonight, we bring you a story ripped from the headlines, a political earthquake that reverberated through the halls of power and left the world reeling. But before we proceed, if you value unflinching journalism and crave stories that challenge the status quo, smash that like button and subscribe to Heartfelt Tales right now. Join our community of truth seekers and ensure you never miss an exposé that truly matters. What you are about to witness is not mere reportage, it's an investigation. We're pulling back the curtain on a White House press conference that became a battleground, a clash between a president's carefully constructed image and the relentless pursuit of truth. This is the inside story of a confrontation that threatened to shatter a legacy, a moment ere the seemingly impenetrable facade of power began to crack. Prepare yourself. This is a video packed with crucial details, insider perspectives, and analysis you won't find anywhere else. To fully grasp the seismic impact of what unfolded, you need to watch until the very end. Every moment is critical. Stay with us. The truth, as always, is far more complex and compelling than you can imagine. The Oval Office was, as always, a performance. The grand, almost comically oversized resolute desk, the precisely arranged flags, the carefully chosen artwork, all designed to project an image of unwavering power. But tonight, the meticulously crafted facade was cracking, just a little. President Donald Trump, his signature red tie askew, his usually impeccable suit jacket tossed carelessly onto a nearby chair, leaned forward, his gaze burning into the glowing screen of an iPad. The air in the room, typically charged with his restless energy, was thick with a simmering tension. These numbers, these damn numbers. He muttered, his voice a low growl that barely registered above the quiet hum of the White House ventilation system. He jabbed a finger at a specific data point, circling it with an almost violent motion. Look at this, Kellyanne. Look at it. Kellyanne Conway, ever the unflappable strategist, adjusted her glasses with a practiced, almost imperceptible movement. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, yet undeniably stylish, bun. She'd learned, over years of navigating the treacherous currents of Trump's moods, that calm was the only antidote to his storms. Mr. President, she began, her voice a study in controlled neutrality, overall, your approval ratings are holding steady. The economy continues to perform strongly, and your core base remains, enthusiastic. She deliberately chose the word enthusiastic over loyal, knowing Trump preferred the image of a dynamic movement rather than a static following. Trump waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that encompassed the entire room, the entire presidency, the entire world that dared to contradict him. The economy is fantastic, Kellyanne. The best it's ever been. Nobody, and I mean nobody, could have done what I've done. But this. He tapped the iPad screen again, the force of the tap making the device jump slightly on the polished wood. Public perception of handling of Trump University settlement. It's still in the negative. Years after this ridiculous, witch hunt lawsuit, and they're still dragging me through the mud. Conway knew better than to directly challenge his interpretation of events. Instead, she offered a carefully calculated assessment, designed to subtly nudge him towards a different perspective. Sir, the data indicates that this issue is primarily resonating with undecided voters. It's not significantly impacting your core support. It's a matter of perception, primarily. Undecideds. They're the whole ballgame, Kellyanne. The election hinges on them. And how am I supposed to win them over when all they hear is Trump University and scam and fraud? It's all fake news, a total fabrication by the failing New York Times and the crooked Democrats. He stood abruptly, the sudden movement sending a small stack of papers on his desk fluttering to the floor. He began to pace the room, his energy restless, almost frantic. It was a settlement, Kellyanne. A perfectly legal, perfectly normal business decision. No admission of guilt. None. They sued me, they tried to extort me, and I settled to make it go away. End of story. Conway knew that, end of story, was rarely the case with anything involving Donald Trump. She chose her words with the precision of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. Sir, perhaps a recalibration of the narrative is in order. Instead of dismissing it entirely as fake news, which, while accurate in some respects. She paused, allowing him a moment to savor the validation, perhaps acknowledging the situation directly, showing some understanding for those who felt let down. Trump stopped pacing and stared at her, his expression a mixture of incredulity and suspicion. Understanding? You want me to show understanding? To the people who tried to destroy me? To the gold diggers and the losers who thought they could get rich quick by signing up for a few seminars? Not necessarily sympathy, sir, Conway corrected smoothly. But perhaps acknowledging that some individuals had expectations that weren't met, that you recognize their disappointment. Disappointment? They were delusional. They thought they could become real estate moguls overnight. They were lazy, looking for a handout, and they got what they deserved. The familiar Trumpian rhetoric, honed over decades of business deals and reality TV, began to pour forth, each word a carefully crafted weapon designed to deflect blame and assert dominance. Conway remained the picture of calm, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of her lips. She had planted the seed. Now, she simply had to let it germinate. Sir, I'm merely suggesting a strategic adjustment. A way to neutralize this issue, to prevent it from becoming a larger liability. It's about controlling the narrative, shaping the perception. Trump continued to stare out the window, his back to Conway. The meticulously manicured rose garden, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun, offered a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside the Oval Office. He was a man who craved control, who demanded loyalty, and who saw the world in starkly binary terms, winners and losers. The idea of acknowledging any form of weakness, even strategically, was deeply unsettling. But he also knew, deep down, that Kellyanne Conway was often right. She was a master of the political game, a skilled manipulator of public opinion. He turned back to face her, his expression still troubled, but with a flicker of something else, perhaps doubt, perhaps a grudging acceptance of the reality she had presented. All right, Kellyanne, he said, his voice softer now, almost subdued. Let's talk about this. Let's see what we can come up with. Sarah Miller's apartment was the antithesis of the Oval Office. It was a small, cramped space in a pre-war building in Brooklyn, overflowing with the organized chaos of a working journalist. Stacks of newspapers and magazines formed precarious towers on the floor, books teetered on overloaded shelves, and every available surface was covered with notes, documents, and the detritus of a life lived in pursuit of the truth. She sat hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her face in the dim light. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and her clothes were wrinkled and stained with coffee. She hadn't showered in 2 days, hadn't eaten a proper meal in even longer. She was living on caffeine and adrenaline, fueled by the burning intensity of her investigation. The Trump University story had become her obsession, a relentless pursuit that had consumed her life for months. She had started with a simple tip, a vague rumor about disgruntled students and questionable business practices. But the deeper she dug, the more she uncovered. She had tracked down former employees, obtained internal documents, and, most importantly, she had contacted the victims. On her screen, a video call window displayed the face of Maria Sanchez, a woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and a weary smile. Maria was one of the many former Trump University students who had lost their life savings to the program. And then they told me I needed to pay for the Gold Elite package, Maria was saying, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and sadness. They said it was the only way to truly succeed, to learn the real secrets. They promised me personal mentoring, access to exclusive resources, everything I needed to become a real estate millionaire. Sarah listened intently, taking notes on a legal pad. She had heard similar stories dozens of times, but each one still felt like a punch to the gut. "And did you get that mentoring, Maria?" she asked gently. Maria shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "No. It was all a lie. The mentors were just salespeople, pushing me to buy more courses, more materials. The exclusive resources were just generic information you could find online for free. I spent over $35,000, Sarah. $35,000. My entire retirement savings. Gone." Sarah felt a surge of anger, a righteous indignation that fueled her work. "I'm so sorry, Maria," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." "I just want my money back," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to be able to retire someday. I just want justice." "I know, Maria," Sarah said. "And I'm going to do everything I can to help you get it." After ending the call, Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhausted but exhilarated. Maria's testimony was powerful, heartbreaking, and damning. It was the kind of evidence that could bring down even the most powerful man in the world. But she also knew that she was walking a tightrope. One wrong move, one factual error, and the entire story could be discredited. The Trump legal team was ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to protect their client's reputation. She opened a new document on her laptop and began to type, the words flowing from her fingertips with a fierce urgency. She was writing the story that would expose the truth about Trump University, the story that would hold Donald Trump accountable for his actions. And she wouldn't rest until it was published. Asterisk, a dimly lit private dining room in the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the murmur of hushed conversations. Several years earlier, Donald Trump, not yet president, but still a formidable figure in the world of business and entertainment, sat at the head of a long mahogany table. Across from him sat John Kelly, his then chief of staff, asterisk. Kelly, a man of few words and even fewer smiles, cleared his throat. "Sir, we need to discuss this upcoming press conference." Trump, ever the showman, waved his hand dismissively. "It's just a press conference, John. I've done hundreds of them. I know how to handle the media. With all due respect, sir, this one is different. There's been a lot of chatter about your past, about the unflattering articles." Kelly had carefully chosen his words. He was treading on dangerous ground. "The failing New York Times, you mean?" Trump's voice dripped with sarcasm. "They've been trying to take me down for years. It's all fake news, John. You know that." "Sir, the issue isn't just the Times. It's broader. There are questions about your business practices, your statements. It's creating a negative narrative." Trump leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Are you saying I should be careful? Are you suggesting I should censor myself?" Kelly, a veteran of countless battles, both military and political, held his ground. "Sir, I'm suggesting that discretion is sometimes the better part of valor. Avoiding unnecessary controversies, focusing on the positive, that's the key to maintaining public support." Trump bristled at the suggestion. "I've always been successful by being myself, John. I speak my mind. I tell it like it is. That's why people like me. They're tired of politicians who are afraid to say what they think." "Sir, there's a difference between speaking your mind and creating unnecessary problems. There are old controversies being dredged up and it's not helping." Trump slammed a fist on the table, the force of the blow causing a nearby wine glass to rattle. "I'm not going to be controlled by the media. I'm not going to apologize for being successful. I'm not going to back down from a fight." Kelly sighed inwardly. He knew that arguing with Trump was often a futile exercise. The man was a force of nature, a whirlwind of ego and ambition. He was also, at times, his own worst enemy. "Sir," Kelly said calmly, "I'm simply advising you to be strategic. Choose your battles wisely. Don't give your enemies ammunition." Trump glared at Kelly for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, abruptly, he laughed. "You worry too much, John. I'll be fine. I always am." The flickering images on the television screen held Trump's attention, but his mind was elsewhere. Sean Hannity, his face flushed with righteous indignation, was in full battle mode, defending Trump against the latest attacks from the liberal media. "And they're at it again, folks. The radical left, the fake news media, they're trying to destroy President Trump with these lies, these fabrications, these witch hunts." Hannity slammed his fist on the desk for emphasis. "They're obsessed with his past, with things that happened years ago, things that have nothing to do with his presidency. They're trying to distract you, folks, from the incredible job he's doing for this country." Trump watched, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He appreciated Hannity's loyalty, his unwavering support. But there was something about Hannity's performance tonight that made him uncomfortable. It felt forced, over the top, almost desperate. He knew that Hannity's support came with strings attached. Hannity was a powerful voice in the conservative media, and he had a direct line to Trump's base. He could whip up a frenzy of support or turn the tide of public opinion with a single broadcast. And Trump, for all his bluster and bravado, was acutely aware of his dependence on Hannity's goodwill. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts, looking for Hannity's number. He needed to talk to him, to gauge his mood, to make sure they were still on the same page. But as his finger hovered over the call button, he hesitated. He was tired of the constant battles, the endless controversies, the relentless attacks. He was tired of having to defend himself against every accusation, every slight, every perceived injustice. He lowered the phone, a sense of weariness washing over him. He was the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world. Yet, he felt trapped, constrained, a prisoner of his own past. Mark Esper, Secretary of Defense, stood stiffly in the Oval Office, waiting for Trump to acknowledge his presence. He was a man of discipline and order, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy that seemed to perpetually swirl around the president. "Mark, come in," Trump said, finally turning away from the window. "What have you got for me?" Esper cleared his throat. "Mr. President, I have a briefing for you on the situation in the South China Sea. Tensions are escalating, and we need to discuss our options." Trump waved his hand dismissively. "We'll get to that, Mark. But first, tell me, what do you think about this whole Trump University mess? The media is going crazy again." Esper was taken aback. He had expected to discuss national security, not a years-old legal settlement. "Mr. President," he said cautiously, "I believe it's a distraction. It's not relevant to the critical issues we face as a nation." Trump frowned. "But it's not fair, Mark. They're attacking my character, my integrity. They're trying to make me look like a crook." "Sir, with all due respect, the best way to address this is to focus on the present, on the challenges we face today. Your leadership in the South China Sea, your efforts to secure our borders, your commitment to strengthening our military, those are the things that matter." Trump seemed to consider Esper's words. "You think so? You think I should just ignore it?" "I believe that would be the most prudent course of action, sir." "Prudent," Trump repeated, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. "You know, I've never been a big fan of prudent. I've always been more of a go for it kind of guy." Esper remained silent, knowing that arguing with Trump was a losing proposition. He had offered his advice, his professional assessment. It was up to the president to decide whether or not to heed it. Trump sighed. "All right, Mark. Let's talk about China. But I'm not going to let this Trump University thing go. I'm not going to let them get away with it. Esper nodded, his expression grim. He knew that the storm was far from over. Sarah Miller's fingers flew across the keyboard, the words pouring out of her in a torrent. She had spent the past few hours transcribing her interview with Maria Sanchez, and the details were even more damning than she had remembered. She paused, rereading a particularly poignant passage. "I trusted him," Maria had said, her voice choked with emotion. "I believed in him. I thought he was going to help me achieve my dreams. But he just took my money and left me with nothing. I feel so foolish. So betrayed." Sarah felt a surge of anger, a righteous indignation that fueled her work. She had to get this story out. She had to expose the truth about Trump University, to hold Donald Trump accountable for his actions. She picked up her phone and dialed Maria's number. "Maria, it's Sarah Miller. I just wanted to thank you again for your courage. Your testimony is incredibly powerful, and it's going to make a real difference." Maria's voice was hesitant. "I'm still scared, Sarah. I don't want to be harassed. I don't want to be sued." "I understand, Maria. And I promise you, I will do everything I can to protect you. But we need to do this. We need to stand up to him." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, Maria spoke, her voice stronger now, filled with a newfound determination. "Okay, Sarah. I'm in. Let's do it." Sarah smiled, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had her story. She had her evidence. And she was ready to take on the President of the United States. She knew this phone call was the beginning of a war, but she was ready. The White House Roosevelt Room, usually a space for formal meetings and carefully orchestrated press events, had been transformed into a war room. Charts and graphs depicting polling data, projected media coverage, and potential lines of questioning were plastered across the walls. Empty coffee cups and crumpled papers littered the long mahogany table, evidence of a long and contentious strategy session. The air crackled with nervous energy, a palpable sense of impending doom. Kellyanne Conway, her signature composure slightly frayed around the edges, stood at the head of the table, addressing a team of exhausted-looking communications staffers. "All right, people, let's be clear. This press conference is going to be a circus," she stated, her voice sharp and precise. "The media is salivating over this Trump University story, and they're going to come at the president with everything they've got." A young, eager staffer named Brad, fresh out of college and fueled by a naive idealism, piped up. "We should just stick to the usual strategy, Kellyanne. Deny, deny, deny. It's all fake news, a politically motivated witch hunt. The president has done nothing wrong." Conway gave him a withering look. "Brad, that approach might have worked in the past, but it's not going to fly this time. The story has legs. It has victims. It has emotion. We can't just dismiss it as fake news and expect people to believe us." Susan, a seasoned communications veteran with a world-weary cynicism, chimed in. "I agree with Kellyanne. We need a different tack. We need to show some empathy, some understanding for the people who feel they were wronged." "Empathy?" Brad scoffed, incredulous. "Are you serious, Susan? That's exactly what the liberals want us to do. They want the president to apologize, to admit guilt, to grovel at their feet. We can't give them that satisfaction." Conway held up a hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Nobody is talking about apologizing, Brad. We're talking about reframing the narrative. We're talking about acknowledging that some people had negative experiences, without admitting any legal liability." "But how do we do that?" another staffer, a nervous-looking man named Mark, asked. "How do we walk that tightrope? How do we defend the president without sounding heartless and out of touch?" Conway paced the room, her mind racing. "We need to focus on the future, not the past. We need to emphasize the president's commitment to education, to opportunity, to helping all Americans achieve their dreams. We need to portray him as a compassionate leader, a man who cares about the struggles of ordinary people. But what about the specifics? Susan pressed. What about the allegations of high-pressure sales tactics, the misleading promises, the worthless certificates? We acknowledge that some mistakes were made, Conway said, her voice carefully measured. We say that the president has learned from those mistakes, that he's taken steps to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. We emphasize that Trump University was a private business venture, separate and distinct from his role as president. And what about Sarah Miller? Brad interjected. She's the one driving this whole thing. She's got it in for the president. We need to discredit her, expose her as a biased, agenda-driven hack. Conway shook her head. That's a risky strategy, Brad. Attacking the reporter could backfire, making us look defensive and desperate. It's better to focus on the message, not the messenger. The debate continued, the staffers arguing back and forth, dissecting every possible angle, every potential pitfall. The pressure was immense, the stakes were high, and the clock was ticking. The press conference was just hours away, and they still didn't have a coherent strategy, a unified message, a clear path forward. Conway looked around the room, at the exhausted faces of her team. She knew that they were all counting on her, that the fate of the president's reputation, perhaps even his presidency, rested on her shoulders. And she was determined not to let them down. Sarah Miller sat nervously in her editor's office, clutching a thick folder containing her meticulously researched and documented story on Trump University. David, her editor, a seasoned journalist with a world-weary demeanor, leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Sarah, he began, his voice grave, I've read your draft. It's powerful. It's compelling. It's also incredibly dangerous. Sarah's heart sank. She had anticipated this, but she had hoped that the strength of her reporting would overcome David's reservations. David, I know it's risky, she said, her voice pleading. But this story needs to be told. These people were victims of a scam, and they deserve justice. The public has a right to know. I understand that, Sarah, David said, his voice softening slightly. But you're taking on the President of the United States. You're taking on the most powerful man in the world. He's not going to let this go unanswered. He's going to come after you, after us, with everything he's got. I'm prepared for that, Sarah said, her voice firm. I've fact-checked everything, triple-sourced every claim. I have irrefutable evidence. I'm not afraid of him. David sighed. It's not just about the facts, Sarah. It's about the politics. It's about the power dynamics. We're a small news organization, and we're going up against a giant. He has the resources, the influence, the platform to destroy us. But we have the truth on our side, Sarah countered. And that's all that matters. The truth doesn't always win, Sarah, David said, his voice tinged with cynicism. Sometimes, the powerful get to write their own history. Sarah stood her ground, her eyes blazing with determination. I refuse to believe that. I believe that the truth will prevail, that justice will be served. And I'm not going to back down, no matter the cost. David looked at her, his gaze filled with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. He knew that Sarah was a force of nature, a journalist with a fierce commitment to truth and justice. He also knew that she was walking into a firestorm, that she was risking everything to tell this story. He hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks and the rewards. He knew that publishing this story could be the biggest mistake of his career, or it could be the biggest triumph. Finally, he made his decision. All right, Sarah, he said, his voice resigned. I'll greenlight the story. But I'm warning you, be prepared for a fight. This is going to be a war. And we're going to be outnumbered and outgunned. Sarah smiled, a surge of relief and gratitude washing over her. Thank you, David. I won't let you down. A flashback, several years prior. A wood-paneled conference room in Trump Tower. Lawyers surround Donald Trump, their faces grim. Mr. Trump, one of the lead attorneys began, his voice measured and cautious, we've reviewed the discovery materials. The plaintiffs have a strong case. The evidence is compelling. Trump, his face a mask of disdain, leaned forward. Compelling? What are you talking about? It's all lies. Fabrications. These people are just trying to shake me down. Sir, with all due respect, the internal memos, the emails, the marketing materials, they paint a picture of a company that was more concerned with profit than with providing quality education. Another lawyer, a woman with a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor, chimed in. The high-pressure sales tactics, the misleading promises, the inflated claims, it's all there, in black and white. Trump waved his hand dismissively. That's just business. That's how you sell things. You create excitement, you build desire, you make people believe they're getting something special. But sir, the first lawyer interjected, these were vulnerable individuals, many of whom were investing their life savings. They were promised a path to riches, and they were left with nothing but debt. Trump scoffed. They were looking for a shortcut. They were looking for a magic formula. There's no such thing. You have to work hard to be successful. You have to be smart. You have to be ruthless. The female lawyer spoke again, her voice firm. Mr. Trump, the legal team strongly recommends that we settle this lawsuit. It's the most pragmatic option. It will save us time, money, and a lot of negative publicity. Trump slammed his fist on the table. Settle? You want me to pay these losers? You want me to admit that I did something wrong? Never. I'm not going to admit guilt. I'm not going to apologize. I'm going to fight this to the bitter end. Sir, the first lawyer said, his voice pleading, the cost of litigation will be astronomical. We're talking about millions of dollars, years of legal battles, and endless bad press. A settlement would be far less damaging in the long run. Trump stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't care about the money. I care about my reputation. I care about winning. And I'm not going to let these people win. I'm Donald Trump. I don't lose. He stormed out of the room, leaving the lawyers to exchange worried glances. They knew that they were dealing with a client who was his own worst enemy, a man who was blinded by his ego and his obsession with winning. And they knew that this case was going to be a long and difficult battle. Back to present. The ringing of the phone pierced the silence of Trump's private residence. He glanced at the caller ID, Sean Hannity. He hesitated for a moment, then picked up. Sean, what's up? Hannity's voice was urgent, almost frantic. Mr. President, we need to talk. This Trump University thing, it's getting out of control. The media is going crazy, and the polls are starting to shift. Trump sighed. I know, Sean, I know. It's all fake news, a total witch hunt. I understand, sir, but we need to be proactive. We need to get ahead of this. We need to control the narrative. What do you suggest? Trump asked, his voice weary. You need to come out swinging, Mr. President. You need to deny everything, attack your accusers, and remind people of your accomplishments. You need to show them that you're still in charge, that you're not going to be intimidated by these attacks. But what about the victims, Sean? The people who lost money? Hannity scoffed. They're not victims, Mr. President. They're disgruntled customers. They made a bad investment, and now they're trying to blame you. You can't let them get away with it. But what if they're telling the truth, Sean? What if I did make mistakes? Hannity's voice hardened. Mr. President, you can't afford to show weakness. You can't afford to apologize. That's what the liberals want you to do. They want to see you brought down, humiliated. Don't give them the satisfaction. But. No buts, Mr. President, Hannity interrupted. Stay strong. Stay confident. And don't apologize. That's the key to winning this. Trump was silent for a moment, his mind racing. He was being pulled in two different directions, torn between his instincts and his advisors, between his desire to defend himself and his fear of appearing weak. All right, Sean, he said finally. I'll do what I have to do. He hung up the phone, feeling more conflicted than ever. He knew that Hannity's advice was risky, that it could backfire. But he also knew that he couldn't afford to lose, that he had to fight back with everything he had. Jim Acosta sat in his office at CNN, preparing for the White House press conference. He had been covering Donald Trump for years, and he knew his tactics, his weaknesses, his triggers. He was reviewing his notes, highlighting key questions, anticipating Trump's responses. He knew that this press conference was going to be a battle, a clash of wills, a test of his journalistic skills. Jim, be careful out there, his producer, Sarah, said, walking into his office. This is a powder keg. One wrong move, and it could explode. I know, Sarah, Jim said, his voice serious. But I'm not going to back down. I'm not going to let him bully me. I'm going to ask the tough questions, and I'm going to demand answers. I know you will, Sarah said, smiling. Just remember, we're on your side. We've got your back. Jim nodded. He knew that he had the support of his colleagues, that he was part of a team. But he also knew that, ultimately, he was on his own. He was the one who would be facing Trump, the one who would be bearing the brunt of his anger and his attacks. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. He knew that he was fighting for something important, for the truth, for the public's right to know. And he wouldn't let anything stand in his way. There were some internal discussions about how far they should push. Some members wanted him to go full nuclear, while some preferred a more subtle approach. Back in the White House, President Trump reviewed the online articles Sarah Miller had published regarding Trump University, his expression darkening with each paragraph he read. He felt a surge of anger, a burning sense of betrayal. He had always been sensitive to criticism, but this felt different. This felt personal. Sarah Miller wasn't just reporting the news, she was attacking him, questioning his integrity, his character, his very being. She's trying to destroy me, he muttered to himself, his voice filled with rage. She's trying to take me down. He slammed his fist on the desk, the force of the blow making the objects on the surface jump. He needed a strategy, a plan to counter Miller's accusations, to discredit her, to silence her. He picked up his phone and dialed Kellyanne Conway's number. Kellyanne, we need to talk. This Sarah Miller, she's a problem. We need to deal with her. Conway's voice was calm and measured. Mr. President, I understand your concerns. But attacking the reporter is not the solution. It will only make things worse. But she's lying about me. She's spreading fake news. She's trying to ruin my reputation. I know, sir. But we need to be strategic. We need to focus on the message, not the messenger. We need to counter her accusations with facts, with evidence, with a compelling narrative. I don't have time for that, Kellyanne. I need to shut her down. I need to make her pay. Conway sighed. She knew that arguing with Trump when he was in this state was futile. She needed to find a way to calm him down, to redirect his anger, to channel his energy into a more productive direction. Mr. President, she said, her voice soothing, let's focus on the press conference. Let's prepare you to answer the tough questions, to address the concerns, to show the American people that you're in control. Trump was silent for a moment, his anger still simmering. Then, he spoke, his voice calmer now, but still filled with determination. "All right, Kellyanne. Let's do it. But I'm not going to let her get away with this. I'm going to make her regret the day she ever crossed me." Scene 7. Mark Esper paced his modest office in the Pentagon. He was far removed from the political games, but the impact was always there. He stared at the seal, unable to focus. He tried calling Kellyanne. No answer. He finally gave up, grabbing his phone again and sending a brief text message. "Kellyanne, this press conference has me concerned. The president seems fixated, and the rhetoric is becoming increasingly heated. It's important he understand this will impact foreign relationships, and potentially, our security." He hit send, staring at his phone, waiting. The James S. Brady press briefing room was a pressure cooker. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic clicking of camera shutters and the nervous shuffling of feet. Every seat was filled, every major news network represented. The usual buzz of pre-conference chatter was absent, replaced by a tense, expectant quiet. President Trump strode to the podium, his expression a carefully crafted mask of confidence. He offered a tight smile, a perfunctory nod to the assembled press corps, and launched into his prepared remarks. Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice booming through the room's sound system. "I want to start by highlighting the tremendous progress we've made as a nation over the past few months. The economy is booming, jobs are being created at a record pace, and America is respected around the world once again." He rattled off a series of statistics, touting his administration's achievements in trade, deregulation, and national security. He spoke in broad strokes, avoiding specifics, relying on his trademark blend of hyperbole in self-congratulation. He painted a picture of an America that was stronger, more prosperous, and more secure than ever before, thanks to his leadership. But the reporters were not buying it. They sat stone-faced, their pens poised over their notepads, their eyes fixed on Trump with an intensity that bordered on predatory. They knew that the real story, the real drama, lay beneath the surface of Trump's carefully crafted narrative. Trump continued his monologue, oblivious to, or perhaps deliberately ignoring, the growing restlessness in the room. He spoke about his America First agenda, his commitment to the forgotten men and women of the country, his unwavering determination to make America great again. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he concluded his remarks. "And so, as you can see," he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of expansive generosity, "we're doing an incredible job. An absolutely incredible job. Now, I'd be happy to take a few questions." The room remained silent for a beat, the tension ratcheting up another notch. Then, a forest of hands shot up, a silent but insistent demand for answers. Trump scanned the room, his eyes darting from face to face, assessing the potential threat level of each reporter. He pointed to a journalist from a relatively friendly news outlet, hoping for a softball question to ease into the Q&A session. "Yes, John, go ahead." "Mr. President," the reporter began, "could you elaborate on your plans for infrastructure investment? You've talked about a major initiative, but we haven't seen many details." Trump launched into a rambling response, filled with vague promises and grandiose claims. He talked about building the best roads, the best bridges, the best airports, about creating millions of jobs, about making America's infrastructure the envy of the world. But before he could finish, a voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. "Mr. President." It was Sarah Miller. She was standing near the back of the room, her body tense, her eyes locked on Trump. She had deliberately positioned herself there, knowing that it would be harder for him to ignore her. Trump's face tightened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. He had hoped to avoid a direct confrontation with Miller, at least for a while. But she had forced his hand. "Yes, Ms. Miller," he said, his voice laced with a barely concealed disdain. "What is it?" Sarah Miller took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that this was her moment, the culmination of months of painstaking work. She had to get it right. Mr. President, she began, her voice steady and strong, I have a question about Trump University. Specifically, about the settlement you reached with former students in 2016. You paid $25 million to settle allegations of fraud and misrepresentation. Do you regret the way Trump University was operated? Do you feel any remorse for the thousands of people who lost their savings, their homes, their dreams because of the promises you made? The room went dead silent. The only sound was the whirring of the cameras, capturing the moment for posterity. Every eye was fixed on Trump, waiting for his reaction. His face flushed crimson. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed into slits. He looked like a cornered animal, ready to lash out. That's a ridiculous question, he stammered, his voice losing its usual bluster. It's ancient history. It's been settled. It's fake news. It's not fake news, Mr. President, Sarah Miller countered, her voice unwavering. It's a matter of public record. There are thousands of people who were harmed by your business practices. Don't they deserve an apology? Trump tried to regain his composure, to reassert his dominance. I've already addressed this, Ms. Miller. Many times. I've said it was a settlement, not an admission of guilt. It was a business decision. End of story. But it's not the end of the story, Mr. President, Sarah Miller pressed. These people's lives were ruined. They trusted you. They believed in you. And you let them down. The tension in the room was palpable. Other reporters, emboldened by Sarah Miller's courage, began to chime in. Mr. President, did you personally profit from Trump University? One reporter asked. Mr. President, were you aware of the misleading marketing tactics used to lure students? Another questioned. Mr. President, will you release the internal documents related to the Trump University curriculum? A third demanded. Trump was being bombarded with questions, a relentless barrage of accusations and demands. He was losing control of the narrative, losing control of the room. Trump lashed out, his carefully constructed facade of composure crumbling under the pressure. This is a disgrace, he shouted, his voice rising in anger. You people are obsessed with the past. You're obsessed with me. You're trying to undermine my presidency. You're the enemy of the people. He pointed a finger at Sarah Miller, his face contorted with rage. And you, Ms. Miller, you're the worst of them all. You're a disgrace to journalism. You're a nasty woman. The room gasped. The insult, reminiscent of his attacks on Hillary Clinton during the 2016 campaign, hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah Miller stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. Mr. President, she said calmly, I'm simply doing my job. I'm asking questions that the American people deserve to have answered. I'm holding you accountable for your actions. Trump scoffed. Accountable? You're trying to destroy me. You're trying to sabotage my presidency. You're part of the deep state conspiracy. Jim Acosta, the CNN reporter known for his confrontational style, stood up, his voice ringing with indignation. Mr. President, that's a baseless accusation. We're here to report the news, to ask tough questions, to hold you accountable. That's our job. And we're not going to be intimidated by your insults and your threats. Trump glared at Acosta, his eyes blazing with fury. You, Acosta, you're the worst. You're fake news. CNN is fake news. You're all fake news. The two men engaged in a heated exchange, their voices rising in anger, their words laced with venom. The press conference had descended into chaos, a shouting match between the President of the United States and the press corps. The other reporters watched in stunned silence, witnessing a spectacle that was both shocking and unprecedented. The foundations of American democracy, the relationship between the government and the media, seemed to be crumbling before their very eyes. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the back of the room, cutting through the cacophony. Enough. It was Sean Hannity. He had been sitting quietly in the press section, observing the proceedings with a growing sense of unease. But he could no longer remain silent. He stood up, his face flushed, his eyes blazing with righteous indignation. "Mr. President," he said, his voice amplified by the room's sound system, "don't let these people bait you. Don't let them get to you. They're not interested in the truth. They're interested in destroying you. They're the enemy, Mr. President. They're the enemy of the people." Hannity's intervention further inflamed the situation. The press room erupted in a cacophony of shouts and accusations. Reporters yelled at Hannity, accusing him of being a propagandist, a shill for the president. Trump supporters in the room, a small but vocal minority, cheered Hannity on, shouting their support for the president. The scene was one of utter chaos, a complete breakdown of decorum and civility. The press conference, intended to be a forum for informing the public, had degenerated into a brawl, a shouting match between competing factions. Trump, emboldened by Hannity's support, joined the fray, attacking the media with renewed vigor. He pointed fingers, hurled insults, and repeated his mantra of "fake news" and "witch hunt." The room was divided, polarized, a microcosm of the fractured state of American society. The press conference had become a symbol of the deep divisions and bitter animosity that plagued the nation. Kellyanne Conway, standing off to the side of the podium, watched the unfolding chaos with a growing sense of dread. She had tried to warn Trump, to prepare him for this, but he had refused to listen. He had been too confident, too arrogant, too convinced of his own invincibility. She tried to intervene, to regain control of the situation, but her efforts were futile. The press conference had spiraled out of control, a runaway train careening towards disaster. "Mr. President," she said, trying to make herself heard above the din, "please, let's take a break. Let's regroup. Let's." But Trump ignored her. He was too caught up in the battle, too consumed by his anger and his need to defend himself. Conway knew that this was a turning point, a moment that could define Trump's presidency. He was either going to emerge from this stronger, more defiant than ever, or he was going to be consumed by the flames of his own making. She looked around the room, at the angry faces of the reporters, at the defiant expression of the president, at the chaotic scene unfolding before her. And she realized that there was nothing she could do. The situation was beyond her control. She closed her eyes, a feeling of despair washing over her. She had done everything she could, but it wasn't enough. The press conference was a disaster, and there was no way to salvage it. Sarah Miller, despite the chaos swirling around her, remained focused. She stood her ground, her eyes locked on Trump, her voice steady and unwavering. "Mr. President," she repeated, her voice cutting through the din, "I'm still waiting for an answer. Do you regret the way Trump University was operated? Do you feel any remorse for the people who were harmed?" Trump glared at her, his face contorted with rage. He opened his mouth to speak, to unleash another torrent of insults and accusations. But then, something shifted. A flicker of doubt, a hint of vulnerability, crossed his features. He looked around the room, at the angry faces, at the chaotic scene, at the wreckage of his carefully crafted narrative. And he realized that he had lost. He had lost the battle, he had lost the argument, and he had lost the respect of the American people. He closed his mouth, his anger suddenly dissipating, replaced by a sense of exhaustion, of defeat. "Mr. President." Sarah Miller pressed, her voice softer now, almost gentle. "Do you have anything to say to the victims of Trump University?" This was the climax. The culmination of months of reporting, years of simmering controversy, and a lifetime of Trump's carefully cultivated persona. Sarah had pushed him to the edge, and now, the world waited to see if he would jump or step back from the abyss. She was appealing not to his political instincts, not to his strategic calculations, but to his basic human decency. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot she had left. The din of the press briefing room receded, fading into a background hum as if someone had turned down the volume on reality. All eyes were on President Trump. He stood frozen, his usual bluster and bravado completely vanished. He looked, smaller, somehow, diminished. His gaze was fixed on the floor, on the intricate patterns of the presidential seal woven into the carpet. It was as if he were searching for answers in those familiar symbols, answers that had eluded him for years. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the whirring of cameras and the occasional nervous cough. Seconds felt like minutes, minutes like an eternity. The reporters, usually so quick to jump in, to interrupt, to demand, were silent, stunned into a rare state of collective speechlessness. They had witnessed Trump's fury, his denials, his attacks. But they had never witnessed this, a complete and utter collapse of his defenses. Kellyanne Conway, standing just off to the side, held her breath. She had seen Trump in many states, but never like this. She had seen him angry, defiant, triumphant, even petulant. But she had never seen him, broken. The camera zoomed in on Trump's face, capturing the subtle twitches of his jaw, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. It was a close-up of a man wrestling with his demons, grappling with his conscience, confronting the consequences of his actions. The carefully constructed facade of invincibility was gone, replaced by a raw, unfiltered vulnerability. The silence was deafening, almost unbearable. It was the silence of a pivotal moment, a turning point, a moment when the future hung in the balance. What would he do? What would he say? Would he continue to deny, to deflect, to attack? Or would he change? The scene shifts. The harsh fluorescent lights of the press briefing room are replaced by the warm, golden glow of a Trump Tower conference room. The year is 2005. Donald Trump, younger, leaner, but with the same unmistakable swagger, sits at the head of a long table, surrounded by a team of executives and marketing consultants. "We're going to make a killing with this, folks," Trump declared, his voice brimming with confidence. Trump University. It's going to be the best real estate education program in the world. People are going to beg to give us their money. A marketing executive, a slick-haired man in an expensive suit, presented a series of mock-ups for advertising materials. "We're focusing on the aspirational aspect, Mr. Trump. The dream of wealth, of success, of financial freedom. We're selling the Trump lifestyle." "Exactly," Trump exclaimed, slapping his hand on the table. "That's what people want. They want to be like me. They want to live the dream. And we're going to show them how." Another executive, a woman with a sharp, analytical mind, raised a concern. "Mr. Trump, are we sure we can deliver on these promises? The curriculum, it's not exactly groundbreaking. And the instructors, they're not all experienced real estate professionals." Trump waved his hand dismissively. "Details, details. People don't care about the details. They care about the promise. They care about the brand. And the Trump brand is gold, pure gold." "But what about the legal ramifications?" the woman persisted. "If we make claims that we can't back up, we could be facing lawsuits." Trump scoffed. "Lawsuits? Lawyers are a dime a dozen. We'll handle them. The important thing is to get people in the door, get them signed up, get their money. That's what business is all about." The scene shifts again. Now we're in a Trump University seminar, a large ballroom filled with eager students. A charismatic instructor, hand-picked by Trump, is pacing the stage, delivering a high-energy presentation. "Who wants to be a millionaire?" the instructor shouted, his voice echoing through the room. The crowd roared its approval. Who wants to learn the secrets of real estate success? Another roar. Who wants to be like Donald Trump? The crowd went wild, cheering and applauding. The instructor smiled, basking in the adulation. Then you've come to the right place. Trump University is your ticket to financial freedom. We're going to teach you everything you need to know to become a real estate mogul. The scene shifts once more. Now we're in a small, cramped office. Maria Sanchez, the former student Sarah Miller interviewed, is sitting across from a Trump University mentor. I don't know, Maria said hesitantly. This Gold Elite package, it's a lot of money. I don't know if I can afford it. The mentor smiled reassuringly. Maria, I understand your concerns. But this is an investment in your future. This is your chance to change your life. Think of it as a down payment on your first $1 million deal. But I've already spent so much money, Maria said, her voice trembling. I've taken out loans, I've maxed out my credit cards. Maria, you have to spend money to make money. That's the first rule of real estate. And with the Gold Elite package, you'll have access to the best resources, the best mentors, the best opportunities. You'll be on the fast track to success. Maria hesitated, her eyes filled with doubt. But the mentor's words were so persuasive, so seductive. He painted a picture of a future filled with wealth and happiness, a future that seemed just within her reach. Okay, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. The flashback sequence ends. We're back in the Oval Office of the earlier scene, Trump's earlier meeting with lawyers. He was blinded by ambition, by the relentless pursuit of success. He saw the students not as individuals, but as dollar signs, as opportunities to enrich himself. The silence of the press briefing room snapped, a taut string finally breaking. Trump raised his head, his gaze sweeping across the room, finally settling on Sarah Miller. His eyes, usually so filled with fire and defiance, were now different. Softer, sadder, more human. Ms. Miller, he began, his voice low and hoarse, almost a whisper. You're right. The words hung in the air, shocking, unbelievable. The reporters, who had been holding their breath, collectively exhaled, a wave of astonishment washing over the room. I made mistakes, Trump continued, his voice gaining strength, but still laced with a vulnerability that was utterly foreign to his public persona. Trump University, it wasn't what it should have been. It hurt people. And I'm responsible for that. He paused, taking a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say the words that had been buried deep inside him for years. I was too focused on the business side of things. On the profits, on the brand. I didn't pay enough attention to the human element. To the students, to their dreams, to their hopes. He looked directly at Sarah Miller, his gaze unwavering. You were right to call me out, Ms. Miller. You were right to ask those tough questions. You were right to demand accountability. The reporters were scribbling furiously, their pens flying across their notepads, trying to capture every word, every nuance, every flicker of emotion. This was history in the making, a moment that would be analyzed and dissected for years to come. Trump cleared his throat, his voice still raw with emotion. I want to apologize, he said, the words seemingly forced from him, as if each syllable were a physical struggle. I want to apologize to the former students of Trump University. To those who were disappointed, to those who were harmed. I am truly sorry. The apology was not just a general statement of regret. It was specific, heartfelt, and deeply personal. I know that an apology is not enough, Trump continued. It can't undo the damage that was done. It can't bring back the lost savings, the shattered dreams, the broken trust. But it's a start. He mentioned Maria Sanchez by name, having been briefed by his staff during his pause. He spoke of other students whose stories he had read, whose pain he had finally acknowledged. He spoke of the lessons he had learned, the mistakes he had made, the changes he would implement. The reporters were stunned into silence. They had expected denials, deflections, attacks. They had expected the usual Trumpian bluster and bravado. But they had not expected this, a genuine, heartfelt apology. Some were skeptical, suspecting a political ploy, a cynical attempt to salvage his reputation. Others were moved, seeing in Trump's words a glimmer of humanity, a spark of redemption. But whatever their individual reactions, they all knew that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something unprecedented. The President of the United States, a man known for his arrogance and his refusal to admit fault, had just apologized. Trump paused, taking a sip of water, his hand trembling slightly. He knew that an apology was not enough. He needed to do something more, something tangible, something that would demonstrate his sincerity. "I'm announcing today," he said, his voice regaining some of its former strength, "the creation of a new scholarship fund. The Trump University Scholarship Fund. This fund will provide financial assistance to former Trump University students who were harmed by the program. It will help them to pursue their educational goals, to rebuild their lives, to achieve their dreams." The announcement was met with a mixture of reactions. Some reporters applauded, a spontaneous expression of approval and relief. Others remained silent, their faces etched with skepticism. The fund was a concrete step, a tangible demonstration of Trump's commitment to making amends. It was a way of acknowledging the harm that had been done and of attempting to repair it. But it was also a politically savvy move. It would help to mitigate the damage to his reputation, to soften his image, to win back the trust of the public. Whether it was motivated by genuine remorse or political calculation, or a combination of both, the creation of the scholarship fund was a significant development, a turning point in the Trump University saga. In the back of the room, Sean Hannity stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He had been watching the press conference with growing unease, and now, with Trump's apology and the announcement of the scholarship fund, he felt a sense of betrayal. He had defended Trump, he had championed him, he had fought for him. And now, Trump had thrown him under the bus. He had apologized to the fake news media, he had admitted guilt, he had betrayed his loyal supporters. Hannity shook his head slowly, his eyes filled with anger and disappointment. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, what he was hearing. This wasn't the Donald Trump he knew, the Donald Trump he had supported. Across the room, Jim Acosta watched the scene unfold with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. He had been one of Trump's fiercest critics, and he had often clashed with him in the past. But today, he felt a grudging respect for the president. He had done something that few politicians were willing to do, he had admitted his mistakes, he had apologized, and he had taken steps to make amends. Acosta nodded slowly, acknowledging the significance of the moment. This was a victory for the press, a victory for the truth, and a victory for the American people. It was also, perhaps, a turning point for Trump, a moment of reckoning that could either destroy him or redeem him. He knew this was a win for Sarah. The fallout was immediate, a tidal wave of media coverage that crashed across the globe. The White House press briefing room, moments earlier a scene of raw emotion and unexpected confession, was now replayed endlessly on television screens, computer monitors, and phone displays around the world. Headlines screamed from every major news outlet, in every language imaginable: Trump apologizes, President admits mistakes, unthinkable U-turn, Trump's moment of truth. News channels broke into regularly scheduled programming for live coverage, cable news anchors barely containing their shock and excitement. Pundits, analysts, and political strategists were wheeled out to offer instant commentary, their faces a mixture of astonishment and professional analysis. The internet exploded with reaction, social media platforms flooded with tweets, posts, and memes, the digital world buzzing with unprecedented activity. The public reaction was as fractured and polarized as the nation itself. Across cable news networks, split screens showed contrasting images, jubilant celebrations in liberal strongholds, silent disbelief in conservative towns. Man-on-the-street interviews captured the stark divisions. "It's about time," exclaimed a young woman in New York City, waving a newspaper with a triumphant headline. "He finally showed some humanity. It's a miracle." "Weakness," scoffed an older man in a rural diner, shaking his head in disgust. "He caved to the liberal media. He betrayed his supporters. This is the end of Trump." Online polls flashed across television screens, numbers fluctuating wildly, reflecting the immediate and volatile shifts in public opinion. Some polls showed a surge in Trump's approval ratings, particularly among undecided voters. Others indicated a sharp decline in support from his core base, the very people Sean Hannity claimed he had betrayed. International headlines were equally dramatic, ranging from cautious optimism to outright skepticism. European allies cautiously praised Trump's unexpected humility, hoping it signaled a shift towards a more conciliatory approach in foreign policy. Adversaries like North Korea and Iran remained silent, their leaders undoubtedly analyzing the situation, assessing whether this was a genuine change or a strategic maneuver. The White House switchboard was overwhelmed, flooded with calls from media outlets, political figures, and ordinary citizens, all clamoring for comment, for clarification, for a deeper understanding of what had just transpired. The world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The apology, the confession, the unexpected display of vulnerability, it had changed everything, or perhaps nothing at all. The storm, it seemed, was far from over, it had merely shifted direction, swirling into a new and unpredictable phase. Sean Hannity's studio was usually a bastion of unwavering support for Donald Trump, a safe space where conservative voices reigned supreme. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension, a sense of betrayal hanging heavy in the air. Hannity, his face usually flushed with righteous anger at the perceived enemies of Trump, appeared unusually pale, his eyes narrowed with a cold fury. The opening montage, usually a triumphant celebration of Trump's achievements, was starkly different. Tonight, a series of clips of Trump's apology, interspersed with reaction shots of stunned and disbelieving reporters. The music was somber, almost funereal. Hannity began his monologue, his voice low and controlled, but simmering with barely suppressed rage. "Good evening, folks," he began, the usual warmth absent from his tone. "Tonight, we are faced with a deeply disturbing development. Something that strikes at the very heart of what it means to be a strong leader, a conservative, an American patriot." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension build. Earlier today, President Trump, in a shocking and frankly, inexplicable move, apologized. He apologized for Trump University. He apologized to the fake news media. He apologized to the very people who have been trying to destroy him since day one. Hannity's voice began to rise, his anger now barely contained. "Let me be clear, folks. This is unacceptable. This is a betrayal. President Trump has always been a fighter, a winner, a man who never backs down, never apologizes, never shows weakness. That's why we supported him. That's why we believed in him." He shook his head in disgust. But today, he caved. He surrendered. He gave in to the pressure from the liberal media, from the deep state, from the radical left. He handed them a victory on a silver platter. Hannity's monologue continued for the entire segment, a relentless barrage of condemnation and disappointment. He accused Trump of political suicide, of betraying his base, of handing the election to the Democrats. He played clips of Trump's apology again and again, each time shaking his head in disbelief and disgust. The phone lines lit up, the switchboard overwhelmed with calls from angry viewers, many of them longtime Hannity loyalists, echoing his outrage and disappointment. The hashtag #HannitiveSTrump began trending on Twitter, a civil war erupting within the conservative movement. The rift was palpable, a deep and potentially irreparable fracture in the Republican Party. Hannity's denouncement was not just a personal betrayal, it was a declaration of war, a signal to Trump's base that their leader had abandoned them, that he was no longer the strong, unwavering figure they had once believed in. The consequences were unpredictable, but one thing was certain, the political landscape had been irrevocably altered. Kellyanne Conway, ever the pragmatist, immediately shifted into damage control mode. Hours after the press conference, she convened another strategy session, the atmosphere in the Roosevelt Room dramatically different from the tense crisis meetings of the previous days. Now, the mood was a mixture of confusion, anxiety, and a desperate attempt to spin the narrative. "All right, people," Conway began, her voice brisk and businesslike, despite the exhaustion etched on her face. "We have a situation. The president's apology was unexpected. But we need to frame this, we need to spin this, we need to turn this into a positive." Brad, the young staffer who had advocated for denial, looked utterly bewildered. "Spin it positive?" "Kellyanne, he just apologized. He admitted guilt. How can we possibly spin that as positive?" "We frame it as strength, Brad," Conway stated firmly. "We frame it as leadership. We frame it as compassion. We say that the president is a strong enough leader to admit when he's wrong. We say that he cares about the American people, even those who have criticized him. We say that this is a sign of his maturity, his evolution." Susan, the seasoned veteran, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Kellyanne, with all due respect, that's going to be a tough sell. Hannity is going ballistic. The base is in revolt. People are calling us weak, spineless, rhinos. We have to push back, Susan," Conway insisted. "We have to counter the narrative. We have to get our message out there. We need surrogates on every network, on every radio show, on every podcast, hammering home the message, strength, leadership, compassion." "But what about Hannity?" Brad asked, his voice laced with concern. "He's completely turned on us. He's calling the president a traitor." "Hannity is emotional right now," Conway said, choosing her words carefully. "He'll come around. He always does. In the meantime, we focus on the broader message. We focus on reaching the undecided voters, the moderates, the people who are turned off by the president's usual rhetoric. This apology, this show of humility, it could actually help us with those voters." "But what about our base?" Mark, the nervous staffer, asked, his voice trembling. "Are we willing to sacrifice our base for a few undecided voters?" Conway sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "We're not sacrificing our base, Mark. We're expanding our appeal. We're showing that the president is not just a fighter, but also a healer. We're showing that he's capable of growth, of change." The room remained silent, the staffers exchanging uneasy glances. They knew that Conway was trying her best, that she was a master of spin and damage control. But they also knew that this was uncharted territory, that they were facing a crisis unlike anything they had ever encountered before. The apology, intended to be a moment of truth, had instead unleashed a new storm, a political tempest that threatened to engulf the White House. In the hushed, wood-paneled office of the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon, Mark Esper sat with a small group of his senior military advisors. The atmosphere was markedly different from the frantic chaos of the White House. Here, the mood was one of quiet relief, almost disbelief. "Gentlemen," Esper began, his voice low and measured, "I think we can all agree that today's press conference was unexpected." General Thompson, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, nodded slowly. "Unexpected is an understatement, Mr. Secretary. I've never seen anything like it in my career." Admiral Davies, Chief of Naval Operations, chuckled softly. "The President, apologizing? Admitting mistakes? It's like seeing a unicorn." Esper allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Perhaps it's a sign of change." Perhaps it's a sign that the president is finally evolving. You think so, sir? General Thompson asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. You think this is more than just a political stunt? Esper hesitated. I don't know, General. But I hope so. I hope this is a genuine moment of humility, a moment of self-reflection. I hope it means that we're going to see a more stable, a more predictable presidency going forward. That would be a welcome change, sir, Admiral Davies said, his voice dry. The last few years have been, shall we say, unconventional. Esper nodded in agreement. Unconventional is certainly one word for it, Admiral. But perhaps this unconventional president is finally learning the value of convention. Perhaps he's finally realizing that leadership is not just about strength and defiance, but also about humility and grace. The military advisors exchanged cautious glances, a shared sense of tentative hope flickering in their eyes. They had been deeply concerned about the increasingly polarized and unpredictable nature of Trump's presidency, about the impact on national security, on international relations, on the very stability of the world order. If this apology, this unexpected display of humility, was a genuine sign of change, then perhaps there was reason for optimism. Perhaps, just perhaps, the storm clouds were beginning to lift, and a new, more hopeful era was dawning. But they also knew that it was too early to tell, that the future remained uncertain, and that much